Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from the second group in A class. We will present about cross-cultural understanding and cultural shock. Before we start the presentation, let me introduce ourselves. My name is Elvita Savitri and my partner is Fanda Novela. The first topic is about cross-cultural understanding and communication. Will be delivered by me. And then the second topic is cultural shock, will be delivered by Fanda Novela. The first topic is cross-cultural understanding. Cross-cultural understanding is the ability to move from ethnocentric attitudes to respect for other cultures, which ultimately leads to behaving appropriately in a culture of different cultures. In cross-cultural understanding, we have positive and negative things interact with new perspective. For example, the culture of closeness of the Eastern people is faced with the culture of openness of the Westerners. Another example is the kinship culture of the Asian people is brought together and introduced to the individualistic culture of the West, America, and Europe. And there are many more cultural encounters between peoples, nations, and ethnic groups at this time. This allows humans to understand other people's cultures, to communicate effectively and efficiently. By recognizing cultural differences, activities, needs, and habits, a person or somebody can understand various forms of culture, communicate appropriately, and do not endure a cultural shock. And the last point from cross-cultural understanding is cross-cultural understanding before cross-cultural communication will increase the chance of success of the communication goals. In this case, before carrying out cross-cultural communication, we should first understand the concept of cross-culture or culture itself. Therefore, these two things, cross-cultural understanding and cross-cultural communication, are related to one another. The next is cross-cultural communication. The definition itself is the process of recognizing both differences and similarities among cultural groups in order to engage within a given context effectively. The second point is, why is it important to understand? Because by acquiring a cross-cultural communication skills, you will be able to express yourself with confidence and understand how to be patient with other people who are not from a similar background. It will also provide a good opportunity to meet fellow students from other cultures and discuss your differences. And the third point is in cross-cultural communication. In communicating between cultures, there is a use of two types of cultural communication approaches, namely the high cultural context and the low cultural context. In high context cultures, communication is focused more on how the message is conveyed than on what is said, and is alert to nonverbal cues. In other words, the meaning of the information exchanged during an interaction doesn't have to be communicated in words. In Japanese culture, things like this are very often used. People communicate with sanepa, eye signals, body language, and so on. P. Low context culture. A culture that relies heavily on words to convey meaning in communication. What is conveyed, the meaning is with verbal words. Therefore, Usually, people with this kind of culture will really pay attention to what the other person is talking about. The next is communication styles. In communication styles, we have two styles. The first is verbal and the second is nonverbal. Okay, in verbal communication, the choice of word use can affect whether our communication is good or not. Although the word use are considered normal in one area, there is a possibility that they are considered impolite or rude in other places, so that there is a possibility that they will offend. What needs to be considered is that the volume and tone of voice also greatly influence our communication success. Loud volume can indicate assertiveness, weak means less assertive. A high tone of voice is generally considered to be angry, and so on. The next is nonverbal communication. Apart from verbal language, what determines the success of communication is nonverbal communication. When communicating with other people, care must be taken. The first one is personal space, touch, facial expressions, eye contact, and also posture. Personal space in here, for example, some cultures hate it when we speak too close to each other, while others prefer to be close to each other. And for touch, touch in here it means touch on some parts of the body is an insult to some cultures, and then touch between men and women must also be considered. And for facial expressions, for example, when we're talking with other people, we can show our emotions. And eye contact, for example, people of Western culture want us to look their eyes more when talking because it shows our seriousness. And the last is posture. Posture, it means including how to sit, hand position when speaking, and others. The next is tips effective for cross-cultural communication. The first, maintain etiquette. What is it? I will give you an example. Many cultures have specific etiquette around the way they communicate. Before you meet, research the target culture or, if time allows, do some cross-cultural training. For example, many cultures expect a degree of formality at the beginning of communication between individuals. Every culture has its own specific way of indicating this formality. And the second point is avoid slang. Not even the most educated non-native speaker in English will have a comprehensive understanding of English slang, idioms, and sayings. They may understand the individual words you have said, but not the context or the meaning. As a result, you could end up confusing them or at words, offending them. The third is speak slowly. Even if English is the common language in a cross-cultural situation, it's not a good idea to speak at your normal conversational speed. Modulating your pace will help, as will speaking clearly and pronouncing your words properly. Break your sentences into short, definable sections and give your listener time to translate and digest your words as you go. But don't slow down too much, as it might seem patronizing. If the person you are speaking to is talking too quickly or their accent is making making it difficult for you to understand them, don't be afraid to politely ask them to slow down too. The next is listening. Good listening skills and showing a real interest are attributes of a successful communicator. Sales associates who enthusiastically listen to customer inquire and complaints are more able to solve problems and gain customer loyalty. And the next things is be careful with humor. Many cultures take business very seriously and believe in behaving professionally and following protocol at all times. Consequently, they do not appreciate the use of humor and jokes in a business context. If you do decide to use humor, make sure it will be understood and appreciated in the other culture and not cause offense. Be aware that British sarcasm usually has a negative effect abroad. And the last one is be supportive. Effective cross-cultural communication is about all parties feeling comfortable. In any conversation with a non-native English speaker, treat them with respect. Do your best to communicate clearly and give them encouragement when they respond. This will help build their confidence and trust in you. The next is cross-cultural communication challenges. First, different communication styles. The way people communicate varies widely between and even within cultures. One aspect of communication style is language usage. Across cultures, some words and phrases are used in different ways. And then the second is different attitudes towards conflict. Some cultures view conflict as a positive thing, while others view it as something to be avoided. The third is different approaches to completing tasks. From culture to culture, there are different ways that people move toward completing tasks. Some reasons include different access to resources, different judgment of the reward associated with task completion, different notion of time, and varied ideas about how relationship building and task-oriented work should go together. The fourth is different decision-making styles. The roles individuals play in decision-making vary widely from culture to culture. For example, in the US, decisions are frequently delegated. That is, an official assigns responsibility for a particular matter to a subordinate. In many Southern European and Latin American countries, there is a strong value placed on holding decision-making responsibilities oneself. Fifth is different attitudes toward disclosure. In some cultures, it is not appropriate to be frank about emotions, about the reasons behind a conflict or a misunderstanding, or about personal information. Keep this in mind when you are in the dialogue or when you are working with others. When you are dealing with a conflict, be mindful that people may differ in what they feel comfortable revealing. The variation among cultures in attitudes toward disclosure is also something to consider before you conclude that you have an accurate reading of the views, experiences, and the goal of the people with whom you are working. The last one is different approaches to knowing. Notable differences occur among cultural groups when it comes to epistemologies, that is, the ways people come to know things. For example, European cultures tend to consider information acquired through cognitive means, such as counting and measuring, more valid than other ways of coming to know things. Compare that to African cultures, preference for effective ways of knowing, including symbolic, imagery, and rhythm. And then Asian cultures, epistemologists tend to emphasize the validity of knowledge gained through striving toward transcendence. This is the last subtopic from the first topic is Islamic perspective. From the Islamic perspective, cross-cultural communication has been explicitly taught by Islam. Apart from the Qasas al-Hujurat verse 13, it can be proven through the hadith the Prophet Muhammad SAW narrated by Abu Darda. Ala uhribukum bi afdhala min darajatis siyami wassalati wassadaqati qalu bala ya Rasulullah qala islahu datil baini wal fasadu datil bainil haliko. Would you like me to tell you something more important than the degree of fasting, prayer, and alms? The companions answered, Of course, Rasulullah. Then the Prophet said, This is to reconcile disputes because the character of the strife is destructive. In short, cross-cultural communication can essentially create harmony and togetherness. Thus, it creates ease and understanding of all kinds of differences and disputes that exist between individuals and groups with communication properly.
The next, I will explain about culture shock. What is culture shock? Culture shock is the trauma you experience when we move into a culture different from your home culture. Another definition, according to Obed, culture shock is brought on by the anxiety that results from losing all familiar signs and symbols of social behavior when living in a foreign country. And this is the 5 progressive stages of Asia shock according to Engholm. The first stage is frustration with the culture. It feels annoyed with the food, language, and etc. The second stage is unwilling to understand. It means do not try to understand the basis of the behavior. Third stage is ethnocentricity, thoughts or reasoning based solely on our own culture and race. Fourth is racism. It means that you believe that your racial qualities are the best, and the last stage is avoidance the culture. It means to not accept the host culture. And the next is about stages of culture shock. Culture shock generally move through 4 different phases: honeymoon, negotiation, adjustment, acceptance, or adaptation. Individuals experience this stage differently, and the impact and order of each stage vary widely. They can, however, provide a guideline of how we adapt and cope with new cultures. First is honeymoon. This stage is the euphoric phase when you are fascinated by all the exciting and different aspects of your new life, from the sight and smells to the pace of life and culture habits. According to Irina Kitz, as an ambassador from Ukraine, she said, In the beginning, the whole process will seem weird for you. Open your mind, observe, try not to compare everything with what you have seen in your country. The next is negotiation. This stage usually hits around 3 months, although it can be earlier for some individuals. As the excitement gradually disappears, you are continually faced with difficulties or unforgettable situations that may often or make you disconnected. The third stage is adjustment. Frustration are often subdued as travelers begin to feel more familiar and comfortable with the cultures, people, food, and languages of new environments. And the last stage is acceptance or adaptation. Acceptance doesn't mean that new cultures or environments are completely understood. Rather, it signifies that complete understanding is necessary to function and thrive in the new surroundings. Like small things, losing keys, missing the bus, or not being able to easily order food in a restaurant might trigger frustration. And while frustration comes and goes, it's a natural reaction for people spending extended time in new countries. And the next is the aspect of culture shock. There are four main points. First, cultural stress. A stress that results from contact with a different culture and the lack of resources to manage the situation. Second, social alienation, the feeling of loneliness associated with being isolated from friends and the home culture. The third, social class poverty. Mentor in host culture can be helpful in advising persons regarding acceptable ways or dealing with poverty. And the last aspect is financial matters. Adapting to a new culture involves financial adjustment. Companies should provide financial counseling. And the next slide is about Islamic perspective. From the Islamic perspective, culture shock has been explicitly taught by Islam. Apart from the Quran Surah Al-Hasr, verse 9, the verse describes about the Muhajirin and the Ansar respect each other. The Ansar, as the host, always try to help and assist the Muhajirin, so that the Muhajirin doesn't feel difficult in adapting to the city they just live in. The Muhajirin and the Ansar cooperate with each other in order to defend the religion of Allah, so that the problems encountered will be solved together. It's mean this makes the family atmosphere even closer and intertwined. In short, the first explain that we must respect each other. Like the answer, as the host always try to help and assist the muhajirin, so that no one feels alienated. That's all from us. Thank you.